Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my channel. Most people think attraction is shallow. They think men notice one body part, make a snap judgment, and move on. But that idea is lazy, and it's wrong. Attraction is not about a checklist of features. It's about signals, signals of emotional health, signals of confidence, signals of coherence. Long before desire becomes conscious, the nervous system is already deciding whether someone feels safe, stable, and real. Men don't fall for perfection. They respond to alignment. When the face reflects clarity, the body carries confidence, physical health signals, care, and presence holds everything together. Miss one of those, and attraction weakens. Align them, and attraction becomes almost inevitable. This isn't about manipulation, performance, or pleasing anyone else. It's about understanding how perception works. So attraction stops feeling confusing and starts making sense. Because when you understand what people actually respond to, you stop chasing attention and start commanding it naturally. When we talk about what men notice first, it's tempting to reduce the conversation to something superficial. But that reduction is already a mistake, because attraction doesn't begin where people think it does. It doesn't start with an isolated feature. It starts with perception. And perception is deeply psychological. The first place that perception lands, almost without exception, is the face, and more specifically the eyes and the expressions that move across them. This isn't romanticism, and it isn't politeness. It's biology filtered through psychology. Human beings are wired to read faces because faces tell us whether someone is safe, aware, emotionally regulated, and responsive. Before language ever developed, the face was the primary interface between one nervous system and another. That hasn't changed. What has changed is that we've learned to ignore how powerful that interface still is. When a man looks at a woman's eyes, he isn't consciously thinking, are these attractive? He's scanning for coherence. He's asking, without words, is there presence here? Is this person grounded in herself? Is there warmth, curiosity, intelligence, or chaos? The eyes reveal emotional health faster than anything else because they reflect how someone processes the world. You can't fake that for long. Eye contact alone carries an enormous amount of information, too little, and it signals withdrawal, insecurity, or avoidance. Too much, and it can feel aggressive or unregulated. But balanced eye contact, steady, relaxed, responsive, communicates confidence without confrontation. It suggests a person who can engage without needing to dominate or disappear. That balance is rare, and rarity is attractive. Facial expression works the same way. A neutral, relaxed face signals emotional stability. An expressive face signals openness and intelligence. What tends to be unattractive isn't imperfection, it's tension. Chronic tension in the face often reflects chronic tension in the psyche. Tight jaws, frozen expressions, exaggerated reactions. These are subtle cues that something underneath is unresolved. Men don't analyze this consciously, but their nervous systems register it immediately. This is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable for some people because it shifts responsibility inward. If attraction were purely about external features, then it would be random and unfair. But if attraction begins with emotional signaling, then it's connected to how a person lives, thinks, and regulates themselves. The eyes reflect sleep, stress, resentment, curiosity, purpose. They reflect whether someone is present in their own life or dissociated from it. A woman who is engaged with her own thoughts, who has internal order, tends to have clarity in her gaze. There's responsiveness there. When she listens, her face responds. When she speaks, her expression aligns with her words. That alignment is what creates trust. And trust is the foundation of attraction, whether people want to admit it or not. This is why makeup, lighting, and filters can only go so far. They may enhance symmetry or highlight features, but they don't create presence. Presence comes from attention to oneself, to the moment, to the person in front of you. Men are highly sensitive to whether they're being perceived as individuals or treated as abstract validation tools. The eyes make that distinction immediately. There's also something deeply philosophical happening here. The eyes represent consciousness meeting consciousness. When two people lock eyes, there's a brief confrontation with reality. Another mind exists here. Attraction intensifies when that moment feels clean and unburdened, when there isn't manipulation, performance, or fear layered on top of it. That's why genuine smiles are attractive and forced ones are unsettling. The body knows the difference. You'll notice that people who are comfortable with themselves don't overuse expression. They don't constantly adjust their face to manage how they're perceived. Their expressions arise naturally from thought and emotion. That natural flow signals authenticity, and authenticity is magnetic because it reduces uncertainty. The nervous system relaxes in its presence. From a psychological standpoint, men are particularly attuned to facial cues because they're assessing emotional predictability. Can I understand this person? Can I anticipate her reactions? Is there volatility here or calm? Those questions matter because long-term attraction isn't sustained by intensity, it's sustained by stability. The face offers the earliest clues to that stability. This also explains why eyes can be attractive even when they're tired, imperfect, or asymmetrical. Lived-in faces often carry depth. Depth comes from experience processed thoughtfully, not avoided. There's something compelling about a gaze that has seen difficulty and integrated it rather than being hardened by it. That kind of maturity registers instantly. It's important to say this clearly. None of this is about trying to perform attractiveness. Performance creates tension, and tension shows on the face. The goal isn't to look a certain way. The goal is to become the kind of person whose inner life is orderly enough that the face doesn't have to compensate. When emotional life is aligned, the face relaxes. When the face relaxes, people feel safe. When people feel safe, attraction has room to grow. Many women underestimate how much power there is in simply being present. Not seductive, not exaggerated. Present, listening fully, speaking honestly, allowing expressions to move naturally. That kind of presence cuts through noise instantly because it's rare in a culture of distraction and self-consciousness. There's also a moral dimension here that people often avoid. Taking responsibility for one's emotional state is an ethical act. It reduces chaos in interactions. It prevents projection. When someone has done that work, their face reflects it. Their eyes don't demand, they don't accuse, they invite. That invitation is profoundly attractive because it respects autonomy rather than trying to control it. And this is where this first key point connects to everything else in the speech. Posture, proportions, and overall presence all amplify or weaken what the eyes initiate. But nothing overrides that initial signal of emotional health. You can have all the physical markers society praises, but if the face communicates resentment, anxiety, or disconnection, attraction stalls. Conversely, when the face communicates clarity and self-respect, everything else becomes secondary. This isn't about pleasing men. It's about understanding human perception. The same principles apply in reverse. We are all constantly reading each other, whether we admit it or not. The face is the first chapter of that story. So if there's something practical to take from this, it's not to change how you look. It's to examine how you live, how much sleep you get, how much resentment you carry, how often you tell the truth, how much attention you give to your own thoughts. Those things shape the face over time in ways no cosmetic intervention ever could. The eyes don't just show who you're trying to be. They show who you are becoming. And if there's one thing worth reflecting on, it's this. When you bring order to your inner world, your outer presence follows, and attraction stops being something you chase and becomes something that naturally responds. After the eyes and the face make their first impression, attention doesn't move the way people assume it does. It doesn't jump immediately to isolated features. Instead, it widens. The gaze takes in the whole structure of how a person occupies space. This is where posture and body language quietly take over and where confidence, or the absence of it, becomes impossible to hide. Posture is not about standing up straight because someone told you to. It's an outward expression of how much weight a person feels capable of carrying. When someone stands with ease, shoulders relaxed, spine aligned, head balanced rather than pushed forward or pulled back, it communicates a simple but profound message. I am comfortable existing as I am. That message lands before words, before intent, before attraction becomes conscious. Men are particularly sensitive to this because posture signals psychological orientation toward the world. A collapsed posture suggests defensiveness or resignation. An overly rigid posture suggests control or anxiety. But a natural, upright stance suggests self-trust. It signals a person who can engage without bracing themselves against life. That quality is deeply attractive because it implies resilience rather than fragility. Body language extends this signal through movement. How someone walks into a room, how they sit, how they gesture while speaking. These are not rehearsed behaviors for most people. They're habits formed by years of internal dialogue. Someone who believes they are a burden tends to move carefully, minimizing themselves. Someone who believes they must dominate tends to take up space aggressively. Someone who believes they belong tends to move with fluidity and restraint. That sense of belonging is what people often mislabel as confidence. True confidence isn't loud, expansive, or performative. It's quiet and economical. Movements are efficient rather than excessive. Gestures align with speech instead of compensating for insecurity. There's no need to prove presence when presence is already established. From a psychological perspective, posture reflects the relationship between mind and body. When the mind is fragmented, pulled between fear, resentment, and self-judgment, the body mirrors that fragmentation. The result is tension, fidgeting, restlessness, or stiffness. When the mind is integrated, the body follows suit. Movement becomes intentional rather than reactive. This matters because men are not just responding to physical shape, they're responding to predictability and coherence. A woman whose body language is consistent sends a signal of internal alignment. Her words match her movements. Her reactions fit the context. That consistency reduces uncertainty, and reduced uncertainty creates attraction. There's also a biological layer here that often gets misunderstood. The nervous system reads posture as an indicator of health and capability. Someone who moves fluidly and stands with balance is perceived as physically and psychologically well-regulated. That perception doesn't require conscious thought. It's automatic. It's ancient. What's interesting is that this has very little to do with body size, height, or shape. People often assume confidence comes from fitting a particular physical ideal. In reality, confidence comes from inhabiting the body you have without apology. Men notice when someone isn't at war with their own physical presence. That lack of internal conflict is compelling because it suggests peace rather than pretense. Body language also reveals boundaries. A person with healthy boundaries doesn't lean excessively, invade space, or retreat excessively. There's a natural give and take in how they position themselves relative to others. That balance communicates self-respect, and self-respect is foundational to attraction because it sets the terms of interaction without hostility. This is where philosophy quietly enters the conversation. How you stand in the world reflects how you perceive your right to exist. If you believe your presence needs to be justified, your body will ask for permission. If you believe your presence is inherently valid, your body will move accordingly. That belief system doesn't form overnight. It forms through decisions, through choose. Eyeing responsibility over resentment, engagement over avoidance. Men notice this because they are constantly assessing whether an interaction will be stable or draining. Someone who moves from a place of self-respect tends to be emotionally economical. They don't demand excessive reassurance. They don't outsource their self-worth. Their body language says, I can carry myself. That's reassuring. It's important to emphasize that this isn't about dominance. Dominance is often mistaken for confidence, but it's usually compensation. Overly expansive gestures, exaggerated movements, or forced stillness often signal insecurity rather than strength. True confidence is adaptable. It softens when needed and firms up when appropriate. That adaptability shows up physically. There's also a moral responsibility embedded in this idea. When you carry yourself well, you reduce social friction. You make interactions smoother. You don't impose your anxiety on others. That's not just attractive, it's considerate. A person who takes responsibility for their internal state makes life easier for the people around them. This is why posture can change how someone is treated almost immediately. When a woman enters a room with grounded posture, people respond differently, not because she demands attention, but because she doesn't need it. The absence of need creates space. In that space, curiosity grows. What often blocks this is self-consciousness. Self-consciousness turns attention inward in an unproductive way. Instead of being aware, a person becomes preoccupied with how they're being perceived. That preoccupation fragments movement. The body becomes stiff or erratic because it's being monitored rather than lived in. The solution isn't to think less, it's to aim higher. When attention is directed toward something meaningful, toward listening, contributing, understanding, the body organizes itself around that purpose. Posture improves not because you forced it, but because your attention has somewhere better to go. This is where key point 2 connects back to the eyes and forward to everything else. When the face signals presence and the body supports it with grounded movement, the impression becomes coherent. The person feels real, not curated, not constructed, real. And that reality is far more compelling than any isolated physical attribute. It's what allows attraction to deepen rather than spike and collapse. It's what makes someone memorable without being overwhelming. So if there's a practical takeaway here, it's not to practice poses in a mirror. It's to notice where you tense, where you shrink, where you overextend. Those patterns are clues. They point to beliefs that deserve examination. Change the belief, and the body follows. Because in the end, the way you stand is the way you stand for yourself. And when you do that with integrity, the world responds. By the time attention moves beyond the face and the way someone carries herself, something quieter but no less powerful comes into play. This is where biology enters the conversation, often uninvited and frequently misunderstood. People tend to resist this part because it feels uncomfortable to admit that attraction has patterns. Patterns that existed long before culture, social media, or personal preference entered the picture. But denying those patterns doesn't make them disappear, it just makes them harder to understand. When men notice proportions, particularly the relationship between the waist and the hips, it isn't a conscious act of measurement. No one is doing calculations in their head. What's happening is recognition. The nervous system responds to familiar signals of health, fertility, and physical stability. These signals are ancient. They're embedded deep in human perception, and they operate beneath language and ideology. This is where people often make a moral error. They hear biology and assume it implies judgment, hierarchy, or cruelty. But biology isn't moral or immoral, it's descriptive. It explains tendencies, not worth. The fact that a pattern exists does not mean anyone is obligated to conform to it, nor does it mean deviation from it reduces value. It simply means that attraction is not arbitrary. The waist-to-hip ratio has been studied extensively across cultures and time periods, and the consistency of the findings is what makes them difficult to ignore. Men tend to find certain proportions attractive because those proportions historically correlated with reproductive health. That doesn't mean every man wants children, or that every woman wants to be evaluated through that lens. It means the perceptual machinery is still there. Even if the context has changed, what's important to understand is that this isn't about extremes. It's not about exaggerated curves or unrealistic standards. In fact, extreme proportions often trigger the opposite response because they signal artificial manipulation or imbalance. What the nervous system tends to prefer is moderation and harmony. Balance reads as health, excess reads as instability. Psychologically, this ties back to the theme of coherence. Just as the eyes reflect emotional coherence and posture reflects psychological coherence, proportions reflect physical coherence. When the body appears balanced, it suggests that the systems underneath are functioning well. That suggestion is often enough to create attraction without conscious thought. This is also why people often find attraction difficult to explain. Someone might say, "I don't know why, but there's something about her." That something is often the alignment of multiple subtle cues rather than one standout feature. Propor. Chians are part of that alignment, not the whole story. Culturally, we've made this topic harder than it needs to be by oscillating between obsession and denial. On one end, there's hyperfocus, endless measurement, comparison, and insecurity. On the other end, there's the insistence that none of it matters at all. Both extremes miss the point. The point is understanding, not obsession, awareness without self-contempt. What often gets overlooked is that body proportions are influenced less by genetics than people assume. They're shaped by lifestyle, by movement, nutrition, stress, and hormonal health. Those factors are deeply connected to how a person lives, not how they perform for attention. In that sense, proportions are not a beauty mandate, they're feedback. Stress, for example, has a profound effect on the body. Chronic stress alters fat distribution, posture, facial expression, and energy levels. When someone is constantly in fight or flight, the body prioritizes survival over balance. That imbalance shows up physically. Again, this isn't a failure, it's information. Men don't usually articulate this, but they respond to it. A body that reflects regulation and care tends to be more attractive than one that reflects chaos, regardless of size. That's why health often reads as attractive even when it doesn't align with fashionable ideals. There's also an honesty embedded in this part of attraction that people don't like to talk about. You can't fake proportion the way you can fake expression or posture. It changes slowly in response to long-term habits. That slowness makes it more trustworthy as a signal. It reflects consistency over time rather than momentary effort. This is where philosophy intersects with biology. The body becomes a record of choices, not in a punitive way, but in a truthful one. How you eat, how you move, how you rest, how you manage stress. Those choices accumulate. The body keeps score, whether we want it to or not. That idea can feel heavy, but it's also empowering. It means that attraction is not something bestowed arbitrarily by fate. It's something influenced by how a person takes responsibility for their physical well-being. Responsibility, in this sense, is not about control or perfection. It's about care. Men tend to find that care attractive because it signals self-respect. Someone who treats their body as something worth maintaining is implicitly saying, I matter. That message doesn't need to be spoken. It's visible. This also explains why confidence alone can't override physical signals indefinitely. Confidence without care eventually rings hollow. Conversely, care without confidence can still create attraction because it communicates intention and discipline. Ideally, the two work together. What's striking is how often this part of attraction becomes distorted by shame. People internalize the idea that if biology plays a role, then their worth is being reduced to a number or ratio. That's a misunderstanding. Biology sets the stage, it doesn't write the script. Proportions might open the door, but presence, character, and alignment determine whether anyone stays. This key point also balances the conversation. The first 2 points emphasize internal regulation made visible. This one emphasizes physical health as a reflection of internal order. The final point will bring it all together. None of these elements exist in isolation. They reinforce or undermine each other. It's also worth noting that attraction patterns don't mean everyone is attracted to the same thing in the same way. Individual variation exists. Preferences differ. But trends persist because they're rooted in shared human physiology. Ignoring that reality doesn't make relationships easier, it makes them more confusing. A more honest approach is to separate worth from attraction. Worth is inherent. Attraction is conditional. Confusing the two creates resentment. Understanding the difference creates agency. So the question isn't, do I fit a standard? The better question is, am I taking care of the body I have in a way that reflects respect rather than neglect? That question shifts the focus from comparison to responsibility. And responsibility, when taken seriously, tends to organize life. Sleep improves, movement becomes purposeful, food becomes fuel, RA. Rather than punishment or escape, stress is addressed rather than endured. Over time, the body responds, not because it's being forced to comply with an image, but because it's being allowed to function as intended. Men notice that function. They notice when a body moves well, recovers well, and holds balance. They notice because their own bodies are responding to the same biological rules. Attraction, in that sense, is mutual recognition. So if there's a reflection to leave you with here, it's this. Your body is not an ornament. It's a living system that tells the truth about how you live. Treat it with respect, and it will speak well for you without you ever having to say a word. When everything else has made its impression, the eyes that signal emotional health, the posture that communicates confidence, the physical balance that reflects care, what ultimately determines whether attraction lingers or fades is something less visible and far more decisive. This is where overall presence comes in. Presence isn't a single trait, it's the sum total of how someone shows up in the world, and it matters more than any individual body part, because it's what turns perception into meaning. Presence is what people are trying to describe when they say someone has energy. It's not mystical, it's psychological coherence made visible. When a person's thoughts, emotions, values, and actions are aligned, there's a steadiness about them. You feel it before you understand it. Men notice this because it answers a fundamental question: what would it be like to be around this person over time? This is where attraction either matures or collapses. Surface level cues can spark interest, but presence determines whether that interest deepens. A woman can be physically striking, but if her presence feels scattered, needy, hostile, or performative, the attraction becomes unstable. On the other hand, someone with ordinary features but strong presence often becomes increasingly attractive the longer you're around her. That's not accidental. It's how human bonding works. Presence is closely tied to attention. Where someone places their attention tells you what they value. A person who is constantly monitoring how they're perceived isn't fully present. Their energy is split. Part of them is performing, part of them is judging themselves, and very little of them is actually engaging. That fragmentation is exhausting to be around, even if it's subtle. By contrast, someone who directs attention outward toward listening, understanding, and responding appropriately creates a sense of ease. Conversation flows. Silence isn't awkward. There's room to think. Men respond strongly to that because it reduces cognitive and emotional load. Attraction isn't just about stimulation, it's about relief. Philosophically, presence is the embodiment of integrity. Integrity isn't moral perfection, it's alignment. It's when what you think, what you say, and what you do are close enough that you don't have to constantly correct yourself. That alignment creates trust. And trust is the psychological foundation of attraction that lasts. This is also where authenticity becomes relevant. But authenticity is often misunderstood. It doesn't mean unfiltered expression or emotional dumping. It means proportionality. Emotions fit the situation. Reactions are appropriate to context. Boundaries are clear, but not rigid. That proportionality is calming. It signals maturity. Men are acutely aware of whether someone's presence is regulated or volatile. Volatility creates intensity, but intensity is not the same as attraction. Intensity burns hot and fades fast. Regulated presence, on the other hand, creates depth. It invites investment rather than consumption. One of the reasons this matters so much is that presence predicts the future. People are always, consciously or unconsciously, projecting forward. They're asking, if this is what it feels like to be with this person now, what will it feel like later? Presence provides data for that projection. Chaos predicts more chaos. Stability predicts growth. This doesn't mean someone has to be flawless or free of emotion. In fact, emotional honesty strengthens presence when it's paired with responsibility. A woman who can acknowledge difficulty without being consumed by it demonstrates strength. She shows that emotions are something she experiences, not something that controls her. That distinction is crucial. There's also a moral courage embedded in presence. Being present requires confronting reality rather than escaping it. It means listening even when it's uncomfortable, speaking even when it risks disapproval, and remaining engaged even when withdrawal would be easier. That courage is attractive because it signals character. Energy, in this sense, is not about being upbeat or charismatic. It's about being real without being burdensome. Someone with strong presence doesn't require others to stabilize them emotionally. They contribute to stability instead. That contribution is felt immediately. This is why presence can't be manufactured through technique. You can't fake it by copying behaviors or memorizing conversational tricks. Those things create the appearance of engagement, but not the substance. Presence emerges when a person has done enough internal work that they don't need to hide from themselves. That internal work often involves confronting resentment, insecurity, and fear. Those states drain presence because they consume attention. When someone is resentful, their attention is stuck in the past. When they're anxious, it's trapped in the future. Presence exists only in the present moment. That's why it's so rare. Men notice when someone is actually there with them, rather than elsewhere in their head. It feels respectful. It feels human. In a culture saturated with distraction, presence stands out sharply. There's also a hierarchy to attraction that becomes clear here. Physical traits catch the eye. Confidence earns respect. Presence determines intimacy. Without presence, intimacy doesn't develop. With it, even modest attraction can deepen into something meaningful. This final key point integrates everything that came before it. The eyes initiate connection. The body supports it. Physical health reinforces it. Presence sustains it. Remove any one of these and attraction weakens. Align them and attraction becomes almost inevitable. What's important is that presence is cultivated, not inherited. It grows as a person takes responsibility for their life. Responsibility organizes time. It clarifies priorities. It reduces chaos. As chaos diminishes, attention frees up. As attention frees up, presence strengthens. This is why people who pursue meaning tend to become more attractive over time. Meaning pulls attention outward towards something worthwhile. That outward orientation stabilizes identity. A stable identity produces presence. So the question becomes less about how to be attractive and more about how to live well. Attraction becomes a byproduct rather than a goal. When it's a goal, it creates self-consciousness. When it's a byproduct, it feels natural. There's a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are oriented toward something real. That confidence doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It's felt. And that feeling is what people respond to. Men, like women, are drawn toward what feels grounded and away from what feels chaotic. Presence is the signal of groundedness. It says, this person is here, capable, and engaged with reality. If there's a final reflection to leave you with, it's this. Attraction is not something you demand from the world. It's something you earn by becoming coherent. Align your inner life with your outer actions, and your presence will speak before you ever do.